Eastern Front, winter 1944. Snow-covered fields stretch toward a tree line where German armor waits in the pre-dawn darkness. 60 Panzer IVs and Tigers, engines idling, preparing to smash through a defensive line held by exhausted infantry with almost no anti-tank weapons. In a frozen trench, a young private winds scrap wire around wooden posts. His hands are raw from the cold, his breath visible in the frigid air. Officers walk past, shaking their heads. One mutters something about desperation making men stupid. But what did this farm kid understand about physics, terrain, and machinery that trained military engineers completely overlooked? If you want to see how a simple idea changed the mathematics of tank warfare, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment if you've ever heard of wire being used this way in combat. Karasin Salient, Ukrainian Front, February 12, 1944. Temperature, 19 degrees Fahrenheit minus 7 degrees Celsius. Soviet defensive positions along a 2-mile stretch of open farmland face an imminent German armored thrust. Intelligence reports confirm at least 60 tanks massing for a dawn assault. The defenders have a critical problem. They possess exactly 4 functioning anti-tank guns, 3 of which have fewer than 10 shells remaining. Minefields were laid weeks earlier, but snow and enemy engineers have cleared most corridors. Standard anti-tank obstacles, concrete dragon's teeth, ditches, require equipment and time they don't have. Enter Private Dmitry Kovalenko, 19 years old, drafted 8 months prior from a collective farm in Belarus. Before the war, Kovalenko spent his winters repairing farm equipment and his summers stringing barbed wire to contain livestock across hundreds of acres of uneven terrain. His hands knew wire the way a pianist knows keys. On the evening of February 11th, Kovalenko approached his company commander with a proposal. Using approximately 4,000 feet of communications wire salvage from destroyed telephone lines, wooden posts scavenged from a nearby village, and basic tension principles, he claimed he could create an obstacle that would disable German armor. The reaction was immediate ridicule. Wire? The engineering lieutenant laughed. You think wire will stop a 25-ton Panzer? A sergeant put it more bluntly. Kid's gone crazy from the cold. But Kovalenko wasn't proposing a barrier. He was proposing a trap built on 3 principles his officers didn't understand: height, tension, and entanglement geometry. On a farm, he'd once watched a single strand of improperly tensioned wire immobilize a 2-ton tractor by wrapping around the drive axle. The tractor's power became its own enemy. The harder it pulled, the tighter the wire bound. He explained it simply. Wire at exactly 22 inches above frozen ground, tension to 180 pounds per strand, positioned in a triple-layer chevron pattern angled at 35 degrees to the expected axis of advance. The engineering lieutenant stared at him. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Kovalenko stood his ground. Give me 12 men and 12 hours. If it doesn't work, you can shoot me yourself. The commander, facing certain annihilation at dawn, made a decision born of desperation rather than confidence. You have until 500 hours. Don't waste materials we'll need for the retreat. What Kovalenko understood, and what the engineering lieutenant failed to grasp, was that stopping a tank and disabling a tank are completely different objectives requiring completely different physics. A tank weighs between 25 and 60 tons, depending on model. Stopping that mass requires immense structural resistance, thick concrete, deep ditches, or buried explosives. But disabling a tank? That requires understanding its vulnerabilities, tracks, vision, and driver psychology. Kovalenko's system exploited all 3. The wire specifications. He used 12-gauge steel communications wire, the type designed for field telephone systems. Individual tensile strength, approximately 1,200 pounds before failure. But Kovalenko wasn't relying on tensile strength to halt momentum. He was using flexibility, multiplication, and entanglement mechanics. Each strand was tensioned to exactly 180 pounds, tight enough to maintain position under wind and snow, loose enough to wrap rather than snap on impact. 3 parallel strands spaced 8 inches apart vertically, anchored to posts driven 30 inches into frozen earth at 25-foot intervals. The critical height, 22 inches above ground level. This measurement wasn't arbitrary. German tank tracks on Panzer IV models ran 18 to 24 inches in height. The lower wire strand contacted the track directly. The upper strands? They intersected the driver's vision slit and the bow machine gunner's field of view. The chevron pattern, posts arranged in 35-degree angles pointing toward the expected German approach, created a funnel effect. Tanks entering the field would contact wire at oblique angles, maximizing wrap potential around drive sprockets and road wheels. The physics of entanglement. When a 12-gauge wire contacts a moving tank track traveling at 15 miles per hour, it doesn't stop the track. It follows the rotation, wrapping around the drive sprocket, the toothed wheel that powers track movement. 1 rotation, wire loops once. 2 rotations, compound wrapping begins. 3 rotations, tension multiplies as wire layers overlap, creating friction against the sprocket housing. At 4 to 5 rotations, the wire binds between sprocket teeth and track links, forcing the entire drive system into mechanical conflict with itself. The tank's own engine power becomes the mechanism of failure. But the engineering lieutenant saw none of this. He saw farm wire, wooden posts, and a desperate kid's fantasy. "You'll kill us all with this nonsense," he said, watching Kovalenko's crew work through the night. "Those tanks will roll right over your little trap and crush us while you're still wondering why physics didn't work." Another officer was more specific in his contempt. "I've reviewed anti-tank obstacle specifications from Moscow. Wire isn't mentioned once. You know why? Because it doesn't work." Kovalenko didn't argue. He pulled the wire tighter. Like this video if you're learning something new about unconventional warfare tactics. Subscribe to see more engineering solutions born from desperation. February 11th, 1944, 1,730 hours. 6.5 hours until the expected German assault. Kovalenko's crew consisted of 12 men, 8 infantry privates, 2 engineers who volunteered out of curiosity rather than confidence, and 2 farmers from his own village who understood wire work. They carried 4,000 feet of salvage communications wire, 160 wooden posts cut from a destroyed barn, sledgehammers, wire cutters, and tension gauges improvised from springs and metal strips. The defensive position stretched 2,400 feet, nearly half a mile of open, snow-covered farmland with minimal cover. Intelligence indicated German armor would advance along a 400-foot front, attempting to break through where Soviet defenses were thinnest. Kovalenko's plan: saturate that 400-foot corridor with triple-strand wire obstacles in overlapping chevron patterns, creating a kill zone approximately 200 feet deep. Installation began at 1800 hours. Working in pairs, men drove posts into frozen earth using sledgehammers, angling them at precisely 35 degrees. The ground was hardened by weeks of sub-zero temperatures, requiring an average of 47 strikes per post to achieve 30-inch depth. Progress was brutal and slow. By 2,000 hours, temperature had dropped to 12 degrees Fahrenheit minus 11 degrees Celsius. Men rotated between post driving and wire stringing to prevent frostbite. Kovalenko moved constantly along the line, checking tension with his improvised gauge, adjusting heights with a measuring stick marked in inches. 22 inches, he repeated to every team. Not 20, not 24. 22. The precision drew mockery, even from his own crew. "We're freezing our asses off for 2 inches, one private muttered. "Yes," Kovalenko snapped back. 2 inches is the difference between wire that wraps and wire that breaks. By 2,300 hours, they'd completed roughly 60% of the planned obstacle field. German reconnaissance flares began appearing on the horizon, probing for defensive positions. Soviet command sent word. Enemy armor was forming up. Attack expected between 0500 and 0600 hours. Kovalenko's crew worked faster, abandoning the rest rotations. Hands bled through gloves. 2 men collapsed from exhaustion and were dragged to cover. The engineers who'd volunteered out of curiosity now worked with grim determination, having committed too much effort to abandon the project regardless of their doubts. At 0300 hours, the field was complete. 160 posts, 4,000 feet of wire, 320 individual strand segments, each tensioned to specification, each angled to intercept armor approaching from the northwest. Kovalenko walked the line one final time, testing tension, checking heights. The wire was nearly invisible in the darkness, marked only by occasional glints of moonlight on steel. The engineering lieutenant appeared at 0345 hours, observing silently. Finally, he spoke. "You'd better pray this works, farm boy, because if it doesn't, those tanks will be sitting on top of us in 20 minutes. Kovalenko didn't respond. He was calculating angles, imagining track rotation, visualizing the first moment of contact between German steel and farm wire. At 0500 hours, the sky began to lighten. Men checked weapons. Artillery crews prepared their remaining shells. The 4 anti-tank guns sighted in on the kill zone. The 200-foot corridor now crisscrossed with wire that most of the defenders still considered useless. At 0517 hours, the sound began. Distant at first, then growing. The unmistakable rumble of massed armor. Engines. Treads on frozen earth. The mechanical heartbeat of panzers preparing to advance. Kovalenko crouched in his trench, watching the tree 800 yards away. His hands shook, but not from cold. 0523 hours. The German armor emerged from the tree in textbook formation. Panzer IVs in the first wave, Tigers in reserve. Approximately 60 tanks total, advancing at 12 to 15 miles per hour across open ground towards Soviet positions. German tactical doctrine assumed minimal resistance. Previous reconnaissance had identified the weak anti-tank defenses. The plan was straightforward. Punch through quickly, exploit the breakthrough, roll up the Soviet flanks before reinforcements could arrive. At 0526 hours, the lead Panzer IV, registration number 432, positioned at the center of the German advance, contacted Kovalenko's wire field. The driver saw nothing. The wire, at 22 inches above snow level and coated with frost, was effectively invisible in the dawn half-light. The tank's forward momentum carried it directly into the triple-strand obstacle. The lower wire strand made contact with the left track first. For the first 3 seconds, nothing appeared to happen. The wire flexed, following the track's rotation around the drive sprocket. Then physics took over. Rotation 1. Wire loops once around sprocket teeth. Rotation 2. Wire begins overlapping itself, creating friction points. Rotation 3. Compound tension builds as wire layers compress. Rotation 4. Wire binds between sprocket teeth and track links. Rotation 5. The drive system experiences mechanical resistance. The tank slows. The driver, feeling the deceleration, increased throttle. The engine roared. The track attempted to rotate faster, but the wire, now multiplied in layers and trapped in the mechanical gaps, created exponentially increasing friction. At rotation 7, the left track seized completely. The right track, still functioning, caused the Panzer to veer sharply left, directly into the path of the tank beside it. The second tank swerved to avoid collision and hit another wire strand. Same physics. Same result. Track seizure in under 10 seconds. By 0529 hours, 3 minutes into the assault, 11 German tanks were immobilized. Some had single-track failures, causing them to spin uselessly. Others had both tracks bound. All were now stationary targets. But the psychological effect was even more devastating. German tank commanders, trained to recognize minefields, ditches, and concrete obstacles, had no tactical protocol for invisible wire. Radio chatter filled with confusion. What's stopping us? I can't see anything. Tracks are binding. The commander of the lead tank battalion made a fatal decision. Push through harder. He ordered increased speed and aggressive maneuvering. This was exactly what Kovalenko's design exploited. The faster a tank moved, the more rotations occurred, the quicker the wire bound. Aggressive turns caused tanks to contact multiple wire strands simultaneously, compounding the entanglement. By 05:42 hours, 19 minutes into the attack, 37 tanks were disabled. Soviet artillery and anti-tank guns, which had been conserving ammunition, now engaged stationary targets. The 4 anti-tank guns, positioned with overlapping fields of fire into the kill zone, fired methodically. Each shot had a high probability of hit against immobilized armor. German crews attempted to exit their tanks and cut the wire manually. Soviet infantry machine guns made this suicidal. Crews that remained inside faced a different problem: artillery. The first Tiger to receive a direct hit from a 76mm shell exploded spectacularly, sending the message to all other crews that remaining stationary meant death. At 06:11 hours, 48 minutes into the assault, the German advance collapsed entirely. 51 tanks were immobilized by wire. 9 more had been destroyed by artillery or anti-tank fire while attempting to maneuver around the disabled vehicles. The German battalion commander ordered retreat. Tanks that could still move began reversing, attempting to withdraw beyond Soviet artillery range. But reverse maneuvering caused many to contact wire they'd bypassed during the advance. 7 more tanks seized during the retreat. By 07:23 hours, exactly 2 hours and 6 minutes after first contact, the battlefield was silent except for burning metal and sporadic small arms fire. Final count: 60 German tanks entered the assault. 58 were disabled or destroyed. 2 escaped. 0 Soviet positions were overrun. Kovalenko stood in his trench, staring at the field of immobilized armor. Men around him were shouting, celebrating, firing rifles into the air. The engineering lieutenant approached, face pale, and extended his hand without speaking. Cost analysis later documented by Soviet field engineers. Wire used, for 1,000 feet, salvaged at 0 cost. Posts, 160, scavenged wood, 0 cost. Installation time, 12 hours. Personnel, 12 men. Tanks disabled, 58. Cost per tank disabled, effectively 0. Comparison to conventional anti-tank obstacles documented in the same period. Dragon's Teeth, concrete $1,200 per 100 feet, required heavy machinery. Installation time, 4 to 6 weeks. Anti-tank ditches, required excavation equipment, 2 to 3 weeks of work, vulnerable to bridging. Minefields, high material cost, required specialized training, clearing hazards remained post-battle. Drop a comment below. Have you ever heard of wire being used this way in any military conflict? What other improvised tactics do you think changed the course of battles? The battle at Karasin Salient should have revolutionized anti-tank doctrine. It didn't. Soviet high command received field reports describing the wire obstacle system within 48 hours. Initial response was skepticism, the same skepticism Kovalenko had faced in his trench. Senior officers questioned whether the reports exaggerated results, whether German incompetence rather than Soviet innovation was the real cause, whether conditions were replicable. But at the division level, words spread differently. Soldiers talk. Engineers compare notes. Within 3 weeks, at least 8 separate Soviet units along the Ukrainian front had implemented variations of Kovalenko's wire system. The technique spread informally, soldier to soldier, trench to trench, with no official manual or approval required. Field modifications emerged quickly. Some units used barbed wire instead of communications wire, finding it caused additional damage to track components. Others experimented with electrification, running low-voltage current through the wire to discourage manual cutting by enemy crews. A Ukrainian engineer unit developed a double chevron pattern that created redundant entanglement zones, ensuring that even if a tank broke through one layer, it would immediately contact a second. By April 1944, scattered reports from German intelligence officers noted unusual wire obstacles, causing unexplained tank failures on the Eastern Front. A captured German technical manual from May 1944, recovered near Lviv, included a brief section warning panzer crews about low-wire traps and advising extreme caution when advancing across unfamiliar terrain. But official Soviet military doctrine remained unchanged. The technique never appeared in formal training materials. Kovalenko received no medal, no promotion, no recognition beyond his immediate unit. He survived the war and returned to farming, where he died in 1961 at age 36 from complications related to frostbite injuries sustained during that February night in 1944. Why was the innovation buried? Institutional military thinking in every nation during World War II privileged expensive, complex solutions. Anti-tank defense meant large-caliber guns, sophisticated minefields, engineered fortifications, technologies that required factories, supply chains, specialists. A farm kid with scrap wire didn't fit the narrative. There's a deeper principle here, one that transcends World War II and wire and tanks. Innovation under crisis doesn't emerge from laboratories or planning committees. It emerges from the edge of survival, from people who understand materials and physics through direct experience rather than theory. Kovalenko knew wire because he'd spent years watching it fail and succeed in different conditions. He understood tension, flexibility, and breaking points not from textbooks, but from 10,000 hours of hands-on work. He knew how rotating mechanical systems behaved because he'd repaired tractors in frozen fields where mistakes meant livestock dying or crops failing. That knowledge, practical, unglamorous, born from necessity, proved more valuable than all the engineering degrees in Moscow. The mathematical truth is simple. 4,000 feet of wire defeated 60 tanks in 2 hours. The cost was zero. The installation required no specialized equipment. The technique could be taught to any soldier in under an hour. But simple doesn't mean obvious. Kovalenko saw what others missed because his perspective came from a different place. He wasn't thinking about how to build better weapons. He was thinking about how to survive with what he had. That's the revolution nobody expected. The idea that the most effective solutions sometimes come from the most unlikely sources, and that expertise isn't always found where institutions expect to find it. The wire that stopped 60 German tanks wasn't military grade. It wasn't designed for combat. It was telephone wire salvaged from destroyed infrastructure, repurposed by someone who understood that in war, as in farming, you work with what you have, you adapt to conditions you can't control, and you survive by thinking clearly when everyone around you is panicking. In 2003, during the Iraq War, insurgent forces used similar principles: low-cost, difficult-to-detect obstacles to disable coalition armor. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, functioned on comparable logic: exploit vulnerabilities, use available materials, create disproportionate effects relative to cost and complexity. The difference is moral context. Kovalenko defended his homeland against invasion, but the tactical principle remains consistent. Asymmetric warfare favors those who understand both their environment and their enemy's mechanical weaknesses better than the enemy understands either. 60 tanks, 2 hours, zero cost. The numbers tell a story about physics. But the real story is about a 19-year-old farm kid who refused to accept that wire was just wire, that expertise only came from universities, or that impossible was a meaningful word when your life depended on being right. If this story changed how you think about innovation and problem solving, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the engineering and tactics that actually changed history. And drop a comment. What simple solution do you think modern militaries are overlooking right now? In war, brilliance rarely comes from laboratories. It's born in frozen mud, twisted from scrap metal, improvised by those who refuse to die quietly.